can make games about anything, and there's a million platformers, and it's like, why would you play this game or that game? I think a lot of it, at least the way I think about these things, is in terms of like, what is the motivation to play, right? Like, why are you playing this game? What's it for?
Hello and welcome. My name is Karosh, and on this channel, I have conversations with amazing people that are involved in game development to learn about and share their stories about their craft. Today, we are joined with one such individual. I had the pleasure of experiencing his game hands-on and seeing what he had a hand in playing with it and just developing the whole thing. Nate is known in the Kaizo world as Shelljump. Could you please introduce yourself and tell the fine folks who you are, what you do, and what is Impulse?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so my name is Shelljump in the Kaizo world. I've been doing Kaizo since before there was a Kaizo 1 back in the Acmolm days, lurking on there, and then later on Super Mario World Central. I was very, very heavily inspired when I was little when Kaizo came out, and I immediately knew that, like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. And I've just kind of been, just part of that scene since the beginning, just kind of working on that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, my original kind of foray into games was through kind of inadvertent speedrunning, and I could talk a little bit about that later.
Yeah.
But I've been working on games since I was little, like drawing levels on paper. I eventually, went to school for it, and then since then I've kind of just been doing this, just as my passion since as long as I can remember. Uh, I'm mostly known in the Kaizo scene. I made a very hard Mario game called Hacker's Dreams, which is sort of the hardest RTA viable ROM hack. Basically, RTA means real time attack. So it's the hardest Mario mod that someone can beat without basically using a computer to help them.
Oh, wow.
Um, yeah, so that was kind of where I kind of started from.
Okay.
And then after making that, that was released actually quite recently. It was a very long development process. And since then, Impulse is kind of the response to that. One of the things I really like about this genre is the fact that it puts you in a very unique kind of flow state that's sort of specific to our genre. And I wanted to kind of take something niche like that and see how can you make this accessible to general people. And that's kind of how Impulse was born. It was the idea of making normal ordinary gamers feel what it feels like to play like crazy kind of like Mario Maker, juggling all these objects in the air, make you feel what it feels like to play that without watering it down.
Okay. So Impulse is a game you've been developing. Could you kind of share for how long you've been working on this game?
Well, I've had the idea for a really long time, but it's just been a slow process, kind of getting to a point where I feel like all of the pieces are ready. It's
Okay.
kind of like it's a really crazy. Like anyone who knows anything about Kaizo, it seems like this is an impossible task, right? To take this genre whose very premise is its impossibility and then make that something accessible. So it took a long time to get that, but just in terms of development time, I would say about a year and a half, and most of that was engine stuff.
Oh, okay. And are you the primary or sole developer on this game?
I was until recently. I've hired on a couple of artists who are working for me, and I have a very talented music producer who helps basically do all of the engineering, mixing, kind of arrangement work.
Nice. Okay, so you've been leading, and that's kind of what it led to me. My introduction to your game is you were showcasing this at PAX West 2023 this past year.
Yes,
Was that your first PAX?
that was my first PAX. That was our first kind of big splash announcement kind of thing. I had been letting people play test kind of in the Kaizo and the sort of Mario esports scene for a while, but
Hmm.
that was our first public reveal, and yeah, I'm very happy with how it went.
Yeah, I was about to ask, how was that experience for you? Just the whole like convention, demo, developer kind of scene. Like, can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Well, definitely going to a PAX is kind of like it definitely feels like you're in the Super Bowl. Like it's really hard to describe how crazy it is walking into that building like the day before the press and the people come in and watching, like you're walking in. I've been making games as a hobby for a long time, but like the difference between, being in a conference call with some people working on some art and walking into a warehouse and there's like, a crane building a multi-story building, that that definitely struck me. And so, it was scary, but then as soon as the doors opened, like, yeah, it was incredible. We were having like young kids, like 10, 12-year-old kids doing the equivalent of, if people know Kaizo, like double shell jumps, like crazy, complicated maneuvers that would take you, many, many, many hours of practice to get. And seeing people do that, sit down and immediately start doing that, it was like everything that I'd been working for. So it was, yeah, it was amazing.
Nice. And have you been, this is your first as a developer, have you been to a convention like this or a game development type thing like this as an attendee before?
Yes, I have. I've been to E3 uh, once, and I've been to PAX 3 times now. Once
Oh,
in Prime, once in Australia, and then now this was my third time exhibiting.
wow. And now, so this is part of the things that when I met you and we introduced ourselves to you, this is being your first PAX as a developer. You come out, make a splash on the scene. You win one of our awards for best of the convention. So just like coming out the gates, just hot, like getting all these people. So congratulations on that stuff. um,
Yeah, no, it was crazy.
yeah, my buddy, the what kind of drew me to it was my buddy. He had seen your game, and he was part of the podcast I was formerly a part of, and he was like, "You guys should like the concept of this game is really interesting, really cool. I think it's worth like checking out." And we're all kind of like checking. There's so many games at these conventions to check out and to see, and there's only so much time. So we're kind of like, oh, we're trying to vouch for each other, like give each other recommendations and such. So when he pointed that out, I was like, yeah, I got to make sure I get a chance to see this, and getting a chance to meet you in the process added to that because sometimes like I'll see a game and it has an interesting concept or a cool idea, but you just it only goes so far for me sometimes as a viewer, as someone experiencing it. I think what gives it that extra leg or that extra oomph, in my view, in my eyes, is when I hear from the creators, and that's one of the reasons I love PAX so much. Is that opportunity to speak to the creators and developers of these games, and understand their rationale, their motives, their interests, and what drove them to make this game. Much to what you've been
Yeah,
describing right now, your history with the Kaizo world drew you to want to draw more people
to
and
do
not
this.
yeah, and build on that, and then you saw that work coming into effect as people tried the game, built the skills as they were going along. So that's great. Like I was really happy. I felt very fortunate to get a chance to come see it, come say hi and everything. So that's again the I think one of by and large, it's kind of for me like, hey, if you've always been on the fence about PAX or like what is this type of thing about, it's you get cool
Oh,
moments
yeah,
like
it's
that.
incredible.
Um,
Well, I mean, part of it also is like, I mean, one of the things I definitely feel that one of the reasons I think why it was so cool is because like I feel kind of a responsibility. Like one of the things with genres, and I'm sure you know this, as a games, media person, games commentator, like there's so many different reasons why people play games, right?
100%, yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that, like, in terms of design, if you want to talk about design at all, I think one of the things that like is very fundamental. I mean, people can make games about anything, and there's a million platformers, and it's like, why would you play this game or that game? I think a lot of it, at least the way I think about these things, is in terms of like, what is the motivation to play, right? Like, why are you playing this game? What's it for?
Hmm.
When you're talking about like in Elder Scrolls or something like that, it can be like that sense of world building and immersion. There's games that you play for the story. There's games that you play for the social experience. But like the thing that I feel, especially with this genre, which I think is not all to my credit, it's really the genre of Kaizo, is that it offers something that's very specific. And so, kind of what I'm trying to do with this whole thing is I'm trying to kind of represent that well, because I'm not just representing myself in a way. I'm trying to represent the Kaizo community and what Kaizo is to people who've never heard of it or certainly have never played it. Because the thing about this genre that I think has a lot of misconceptions,
Hmm.
there's a long history to Kaizo, but there's a lot of misconceptions about it because, you know, typically, I think the average person either hasn't heard of it or has heard of Kaizo as being sort of like this troll genre. Like when I say Kaizo, most people, the first thing that goes into their head is like, I want to be the guy, or like maybe some kind of like, fan game similar to that, or maybe like, Proton John in the Something Awful days, like, running into an invisible coin block. You know, and people typically associate Kaizo with sort of an anti-design, where it's like the game is sort of a conversation between the player and the developer, where the developer is kind of playfully outsmarting you and kind of tricking you, and it can range anywhere from being playful to being like YouTube rage bait.
Mm.
But that's not necessarily what the genre is about, and there's a really long and interesting history of Kaizo, because it's always kind of been sort of an outsider art thing. It's almost like graffiti in a way, where kind of the whole premise is, starting in the Mario World scene, like the whole premise of Kaizo was really like, what if we just took these systems of Mario that everybody understands and kind of just make the most, you know, complicated, interesting, you know, extravagant kind of baroque obstacles and things with it that we can think of. It's sort of like we're trying to build these Rube Goldberg machines out of these simple pieces.
Yeah.
And one of the things that then asks is, there's a whole bunch of different avenues of what do you feel when you play this that you could get out of that. And the first one that became popular was the Super Mario frustrations, and the Something Awful Let's Play, and kind of that kind of era, because it happened, all that stuff sort of happened around the same time that I Want to Be the Guy came out.
Mm.
But then afterwards, I feel like one of my contributions, and a whole bunch of other people that I could name, just to name a few. There's of course Panga, Tokaban Solver, World Peace, just to name a few. Everybody on the Jump team. Um, it later kind of became about, well, what if we actually do the opposite of that? What if we try to go in the opposite direction, instead of trying to make you notice that you're dying all the time, make you forget that you're dying all the time? And I
Mm.
don't know if you felt that feeling when you were playing my game at all, but kind of the idea is to actually minimize uh, the lose state.
Yeah, I don't
You know
think
what I
it.
mean?
Yeah,
Like,
I now that I kind of like, I was trying to recollect some of my experience playing your game, and I was more focused. Like my focus never felt on the moments I had died, more so the moments leading up to it and what I didn't do or should have done, and or focusing on the next attempt and what like the
right,
aspects of it I should be working on. Actually, my attention was always drawn to what just go like let's build off of the last one, or let's revise off of the last one, and not so much on like, oh, I died, okay, I'm done kind of thing. It never, that experience never hit for me, or like in this, it didn't register for me like, oh, I'm acknowledging I died. It was just more like, okay, next attempt. And if I did succeed, it would often be okay, my immediate thought wasn't, oh, I did it. It was more, what's the next thing? Like I was just
right.
focused on the next aspect of it, and it like, I think if I'm not the most skilled in those, and I think that showed. My friend was way better, I think, between the two of us. um,
But it's
but like one of the things I feel like is that if I get even to some semblance of proficiency to manage to get through some aspects of it, there's a bit of a flow that you just start hitting, and it's like
yeah.
you're chasing it. You're chasing that feeling like, oh, I can't wait till I get to that, and the anticipation to get to that is fun, engaging.
Well, that's the whole thing about it. That I think that's why it's kind of. I think that's the novelty of it, and I think that's like why, again, I say, like, it's not just that, like, I came up with this game idea. It's that I'm kind of representing a genre, and the whole point of the project is to let people experience that genre, because it's not about winning or losing. Like, it doesn't really matter how good you are at the game. The feeling is like supposed to be like basically just a feeling of like learning, like
Hmm.
going from not understanding, from like going seeing something that looks impossible, and then like in the like sort of microcosm sort of way, like slowly learning one input at a time what you need to do until you can do it. It's sort of like playing an instrument, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
like It's the feeling of like you're playing like, I don't know if you play guitar or drums or something, but like the feeling of when you know how to play an instrument already, like learning a song. Like at the beginning, it's like, okay, well, all right, so there's a bar 4/4 here, and there's a bar 3/4. Okay, there's a key change right here, and you practice it with your friends a couple of times. And at the beginning, it's like clunky, but then like you start jamming. Like that's supposed to be the feeling. The problem is that when you're trying to learn an instrument, before you get to the point where you can, place your hand on the fretboard and play the chords, that's a very different experience. And so everybody comes to Kaizo, right? Everybody comes to this genre, and the feeling that they feel is like the feeling of trying to play guitar when you don't know the chords yet. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it's
Yeah.
like that feeling of like trying, like it's like this awkward kind of like, I'm not sure. And so like the whole thing is like, well, what can we do to make you feel what it feels like to jam on the guitar, but not make you go through the arduous process of learning the chord shapes? So like that's really what it's always been about. And like that's why, for example, there's this musical theme in the game,
Yeah, I
right?
wanted to I wanted
Right.
to touch on
Yeah.
that. I thought that was one of the aspects I found really interesting. Could you share some?
Yeah. So the whole thing is the whole game is harmonized to the music. So like the game doubles basically as like a prog piece. So there's not different pieces of music. There's one piece of music that's contiguous, and we set loop points in it. So like as you progress through the game, basically the music is continuing. Sort of if you ever listen to like any Dream Theater, or like maybe like some Yes or different prog rock bands, they have like kind of sections of the music, right? And so it's this feeling of the evolution of it. And that's there's two reasons why the game is themed that way. I mean, also you play as a shape-shifting flute. You're picking up notes and shooting them.
Yeah.
There's two reasons for that. The first is it's kind of the allegory, right, that I'm trying to get at with Kaizo, which is like this feeling of not understanding to understanding, like playing music. But then the other part is actually to teach you, because there's an audio cue. So the whole game, um, there's 7 notes, just like there are, and you use the notes to move. You collect the notes and you shoot them, and then you can get propelled by them and then run back into them like a rocket jump. And each note does something different. There's one that, like, for example, you can teleport to where the note is and swap positions with it. There's another one where, you laser across the screen really fast. There's all these different kind of ones. I think you only saw one kind of note, if I
For
remember
my
correctly.
playthrough,
Yeah, yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I only
yeah.
saw the one.
But there's 7 notes, and that's because do re mi. There's 7. There's 7 notes in a scale, and they harmonize. So, for example, that first note is always the root note. Whatever the music is doing, that heel note that you saw always plays the root note, no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
And that the purpose of that is not just to be cool. It's actually because um, it helps with audio cues. So like when you're playing the game at a more advanced level, if you hear that the sound effects just did 5/1 instead of 1/5, then it's like, oh well, I probably picked up the notes in the wrong order because I played the 5 before I played the 1. And you
Okay.
don't have to know music theory to understand it, but it's the fact that there's an audio cue that's like, it sounds right or wrong. You know what I mean? Like you can actually hear that you're doing it right or wrong, and that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like one of the ideas about trying to get you up to speed without making you go through the process. So the game is meant to look more complicated than your average Kaizo level, but it's meant to play like it's meant to get you there fast. And so music is the way we do that. Um,
And
there's
something
other there's other elements too, but that's the main one.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that you were. I mean, within the game, it was interesting to me how you had incorporated. But the reason you also were, what I recall, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, was elements of that learning process and an homage to the original creators, or to an homage to someone, the concepts that make Kaizo what it was. Is that am I remembering accurate? Can you shed some light on?
Um, Well, the whole thing is, I mean, the whole thing is there's many different, and like there there's many different little subtle homages. They're subtle enough that actually even some of the Kaizo people haven't caught them yet. There's a reference to a very famous VLDC So in the Mario world, there's something called VLDC, which is the vanilla contest, which
Okay.
basically just means you make a level without adding any extra programming.
Okay.
There's a very famous level. There's a reference to that. I take inspiration from a lot of people. I'm definitely not here on my own. But like uh, I'm kind of representing that whole genre. But in terms of the learning and all of that stuff, it's more just kind of what I've learned being in that kind of community for a long time. So
Okay.
part of it is that maybe what you're referencing is I do have a lot of people who are very active in the speedrunning scene who are playtesters.
Well,
There's
I
a lot of people
the part that I
doing that.
remember, it was in regards to something you were already referring to, which was the process of learning Kaizo was similar to the
Oh
process of
yeah.
learning an instrument.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that was some
Yes.
of the
Yes.
original, like, there was a methodology to it, or there was a concept to it that you wanted to
Yes.
not just pay homage to, as like of like with the notes in the game, but also it's very meta in that that's what you're doing in a Kaizo game, and
Yeah.
this is that.
Yeah.
I thought that, to me, that was a fascinating
Yeah.
element of it, and so
That's I didn't catch it. Yeah, that actually is true. And so that's one of the things. Like this is why it's so interesting. Like not even like just beyond Impulse and beyond Kaizo, it's a very interesting phenomena, this whole scene, because like it's weird how many musicians there are in the Kaizo scene. Like there's a lot. Like a lot. Just off the top of my head, I mentioned Hacker's Dreams, which is the thing that I'm more known for inside of that kind of niche. Off of the three people who have beaten Hacker's Dreams, besides myself, um, well, I want to include the people playing it also.
okay.
It's more than 50% of them are like in some aspect professional musicians or like going to music school or something. And then if I include the playtesters, like it is a crazy amount of people who are like musicians on some level. And I think the reason for that is because they're very similar activities. They are. It's that process of learning. So yeah, it was inspired by them in that way. Yeah, and I am leveraging that. But it's just an interesting observation. It's just it's an interesting thing, and it goes back to this whole idea of like, why do people play games? There's a lot of different reasons, and
Hmm.
one of them is just the feeling of like, it's the feeling of learning. It's the feeling of going from not understanding something to understanding something, or like the feeling of not being like competent at something to suddenly feeling masterful at it. Like that's a specific thing that is not necessarily the same thing as difficulty, because
Yeah.
there's a whole nother genre, right, of like the Dark Souls people, or like games like that. Like there's literally an old indie game called Punishment, and the whole point of the game is to just feel punished. There's a lot, and that's a genre, and it's a valid feeling. It's like maybe I just want to play this game to just feel completely crushed. But this is sort of like the opposite. This is like the opposite of that. It's like I want to play the game. I'm gonna feel overwhelmed. I'm gonna feel like it's really freaking hard. But I'm at the end. Hopefully, I'm gonna feel like at the end of it, like, wow, I'm really good at video games. Like that's the feeling that I want to leave you with.
Nice. And so, just in the sense of, thank you for sharing all that. I think one of the things I'm kind of curious about is, now that you've been showcasing the game, you've been, doing a lot of playtesting and so on and so forth. Where's the next step for you in this process of the development? Is this also, just to clarify, is this your first, like, you know published, like, professional game that you've been putting out, or do you have?
This is my first game that's like a commercial.
Okay.
So I've done the Mario modding Kaizo thing for a very long time, but
Hmm.
that was always like hobby stuff. That was not like commercial.
Okay.
But the next steps for this would be like, obviously I want to have part of the fun of Kaizo is it's sort of like everybody who's good at it also makes Kaizo, and that's kind of how you get better. So I want to have like a very, very good level editor. I want
Okay.
to have something where like you can draw the levels in and play them, and like you can really like sort of you know you will have enough content that you'll never be bored, you'll never be stuck. That's part of also one of the things I didn't say about the game is the very very accessible nature of like the save states, which are drawn from Kaizo and things like that, where you can save anywhere in the game. But one of the things in addition to that is just having a level editor, having lots of user generated content. So I'm trying to work hard on that front. I'm in publisher talks right now, which I can't talk too much about,
Sure,
obviously.
absolutely, of course.
Um, but that's kind of where things sit right now. Is I'm looking to kind of get some more funding, get the publisher situation uh, figured out, and then move from there. But the cool thing about this game is like all the hard problems have already been solved. So like the design problems, getting this stuff working, that's already been solved because we had 10-year-olds playing the game. Like we know it's known that it works at this point.
Okay.
And the other thing about it that's cool is like we already have all of the hard programming basically done as well. So really all that is left to do is to just make a bunch of levels and to draw those levels, which is the fun part. So basically my day consists of, you know, meeting with people for publishing stuff, doing making levels and drawing them, and that's like my life.
You're like,
So
I
things
love
are
this.
pretty good right it's perfect. Yeah, it's really good. So I mean, but I mean that's just kind of always been the dream. Like it's always been the dream to take this to people, and you know, it's such a specific interest too.
Hmm.
Like this feeling that we get when we do this kind of stuff, and like I want people to experience it because it's really cool. Like if I can get as many people as possible into this genre, I will be like happy. Like that's basically my goal. I just want people to know what it feels like to be like you know me in the back of the computer lab in 2004 playing funny Mario mods on that I downloaded off of Zofar. Like that's really what I'm trying. That's really what I'm trying to do.
Hey man, I think you're succeeding because the literally that's how my friend introduced. He's like, "Hey, I saw something really cool. I think more people should see this," and he brought it to me. And then I was like, I thought the same thing. And I'm like, and I want to have a conversation so we can share this and hopefully put more people on it, kind of like feeding it forward. So, in my eyes, I think that you're on the right track. You're on the right path. I had one last question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, definitely.
On the development side, do you have any, part of this is I want this to be informative, I want this to be insightful for those also on similar journeys or interested in taking their own journeys in that. Do you have any insights or guidances for anyone looking to do a similar path or to take a similar thing where they want to make a game, they want to go into the development, and
Yeah.
what would you impart onto someone like that?
So there's a couple of things that I could plug that I have no affiliation with.
Sure.
So I'm not plugging this for any gain on myself. These are just the resources that have helped me the most.
Okay.
The first thing I would say is there's design, like game design, not necessarily level design, but like game design. I feel like is a harder problem to solve than the actual making of the game, and it's easy to just put something out, but it's hard to like come up with interesting ideas. And I think part of that is the philosophy of like figuring out what's the need that this game is fulfilling and how am I going to do that. So there's a couple of things that help you kind of tune things. One is there's a book by Steve Swink called Game Feel, which is excellent. I would really recommend Game Feel. Basically everything that I know about game design I learned from Game Feel. That's the first thing I would recommend. Second thing I would recommend is there's something called mechanics, dynamics, aesthetics, which is sort of just a philosophy of coming up with games. Basically, in one sentence, the idea is like, you have a mechanic like you can jump,
Hmm.
and then, or like a better, the most famous example is in Quake, the mega health and the mega armor spawn at different times. That's a mechanic,
Hmm.
right? They spawn at this speed. The
Right.
dynamic behind that is because they spawn at the different times, people eventually they will spawn at the same time because it will like sync up. And since they're in different places on the map, that will mean that there will be a contest for power at some point during the thing. And then what's the
Mm,
aesthetic that creates? The aesthetic that creates is that there's this timing resource control challenge. And so now you feel the sense of anxiety, the sense of time pressure. You're having to basically do these loops around the map, and it's causing people to basically like run around, the map like a racetrack trying to
yeah.
collect all the items.
Wow.
So like if you think about that, that's that's how a player experiences a game, right? A player experiences, the mega health, help boosts my health, and mega armor, boosts my armor. They spawn at this rate. But then there's this behavior that comes out of it. And then there's this, psychological response of like, oh, time pressure. I need to run around in circles on the map. That's the aesthetic. So like if you're a designer, you need to start thinking in the opposite direction. You need to start thinking like, what is the emotional thing that I want? What's the dynamic that it's going to create? And then what are the mechanics that are going to facilitate that? So that plus game feel covers that part. And then in terms of programming, I mean, I would just say keep it simple. I made the early mistake of trying to make something like in my early career, with like the ROM hacking, trying to make things that were too grandiose.
Okay.
Keep your scope small. Like always, write something down. It doesn't have to be a game design document. Just write something for yourself of like, how big is this thing going to be? What is going to be in it? And then don't let that get bigger than what you originally wrote down. Make lots of small things instead of making one really big thing. Um, and then I would also say, like, I mean, in terms of programming, I'm probably not. I would defer to more seasoned people, but I would just say the same thing. Like, keep it simple. If you need to use, if your game is using, 2D axis aligned bounding boxes, then you probably don't need to be like, keep it that way. Like, the realize the level of complexity that you need, and don't make it more complex than that. But I mean that basically would cover all of the main things. But I would say above and beyond, the most important thing is figure out the reason why your game needs to exist, and then design everything in terms of that reason.
That's yeah. Thank you so much for sharing those insights. I think that's very valuable for many to listen to and take in the notes. Again, Nate, thank you for your time. Shelljump, known in the Kaizo world, like I said. Before we wrap up, is there anything or anywhere, anything you'd like to plug or direct people to anywhere in particular for people to find you or to find your work?
Yeah, definitely. You could find me on Steam. If you just go to inpulsegame.com, that's INPULSE game.com, it will just redirect right to our Steam page. In terms of that, in terms of my socials, you can follow me on Twitter as shell_jump at Shelljump. Um, but those are my main places. You can always find me on if you hang out on Twitch at all and you just go through the Kaizo streams, you'll eventually run into me.
You're everywhere in that
I'm
community.
I, I'm always I'll be in someone's chat. Go to Twitch TV/third wall and go to the chat. I'll be there.
There you go.
All
That's
right.
so you can hang out
All right.
with Nate.
Yeah.
But I'll make sure to also link those in the show notes as well for your game and for your socials. So thank you, Nate. And again, thank you everyone for listening in. I hope you found this conversation enjoyable, entertaining, and insightful in some fashion. Um, and I really appreciate it. Well, you can find on my channel at youtube.com at Kujoprime for similar conversations like the one I just had, Nate and I just had. And I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate it.